November 21st, 1944, 7 kilometers northeast of Metz, France, at precisely 0600 hours, the morning mist clung to the muddy fields like a grey shroud over the countryside. Private First Class Jerome Washington crouched in a shell crater that had been carved out by German artillery 3 days earlier, watching the enemy position through the pale dawn light, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. At 18 years old, this young Marine from Detroit had survived the brutal Pacific theater campaigns on Saipan and Tinian, only to find himself transferred to the European front as part of an experimental integration program that few believed would succeed. He had no idea that in the next 4 hours, armed with nothing more than a broken bayonet and an unwavering determination, he would accomplish something that would challenge every assumption about courage, race, and the nature of warfare itself. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What began as a routine reconnaissance patrol would transform into an extraordinary demonstration of how individual courage and quick thinking could overcome seemingly impossible odds, forever changing not only the lives of 13 soldiers from 2 different armies, but also contributing to a quiet revolution in military thinking that would echo through the corridors of the Pentagon for decades to come. Private First Class Washington had arrived in the European theater just 6 weeks earlier, part of a classified program that the Marine Corps had reluctantly initiated under pressure from the Roosevelt administration. The program aimed to test whether Black Marines, who had proven themselves exceptional in the Pacific campaigns, could be effectively integrated into combat units fighting against the German armed forces during the war. Washington represented one of only 47 Marines selected for this experimental deployment, chosen not only for their combat experience, but also for their psychological profiles and leadership potential. The statistics were sobering. Of the original 412 Black Marines who had volunteered for European service, only these 47 had passed the rigorous selection process that included not just military competency tests, but also psychological evaluations designed to identify individuals who could maintain their effectiveness while facing both enemy fire and the hostility of some within their own ranks. Washington had scored in the top 5% in all categories, demonstrating not only exceptional marksmanship and tactical awareness, but also what the evaluators described as an unusual combination of steadiness under pressure and creative problem-solving ability. The morning of November 21st found Washington's unit, the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, positioned in what had once been a prosperous farming region near Metz. The landscape bore the scars of months of fighting, with abandoned farmhouses standing like broken teeth against the horizon, their walls pockmarked with small arms impacts and their roofs collapsed from artillery strikes. The fields themselves had been transformed into a nightmare maze of craters, abandoned equipment, and hastily dug defensive positions that both armies had occupied and abandoned multiple times over the past 8 weeks. Captain Robert Mitchell, Washington's company commander, had specifically requested Washington for this reconnaissance mission despite strong objections from several senior officers. Mitchell, a 34-year-old veteran of Guadalcanal who had earned 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star, had observed Washington's performance during training exercises in England and had become convinced that the young Marine possessed an instinctive understanding of small unit tactics that transcended conventional military training. Washington approaches problems differently than most Marines, Mitchell had written in a confidential report to his battalion commander 3 weeks earlier. Where most Marines are trained to apply overwhelming force and follow established procedures, Washington demonstrates an ability to adapt tactics to specific situations in ways that suggest genuine tactical innovation. His performance in simulated combat scenarios consistently exceeds expectations, not through superior physical capabilities, but through creative interpretation of tactical challenges. The mission that morning was ostensibly simple: conduct a reconnaissance patrol to determine the strength and disposition of German forces occupying a cluster of farm buildings approximately 2 kilometers northeast of the American lines. Intelligence reports suggested that a German reconnaissance unit of unknown size had established a temporary observation post in the area, but aerial reconnaissance had been unable to provide accurate information due to heavy cloud cover and the camouflaged nature of the position. Washington's patrol consisted of 4 Marines, himself as the lead scout, Corporal Danny O'Malley from Boston serving as the patrol leader, Private Tommy Chen from San Francisco as the radio operator, and Private First Class Michael Rodriguez from Texas handling automatic weapons. This mixed composition was itself part of the experimental program, designed to test whether integrated units could function effectively under combat conditions. The patrol had departed their forward positions at 0400 hours, moving through the pre-dawn darkness along a route that Captain Mitchell had personally planned to avoid known German observation points and minefields. The route took advantage of natural terrain features, using creek beds and fence lines to provide concealment while approaching the target area from an unexpected direction. As they moved through the countryside, Washington found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought him to this muddy field in France. Born in Detroit in 1926, he had grown up in a neighborhood where the sound of factory machinery from the automobile plants provided a constant background rhythm to daily life. His father, James Washington, worked as a riveter at the Ford Rouge plant, while his mother, Marie, took in laundry to supplement the family income during the Depression years. The attack on Pearl Harbor had changed everything for the Washington family, as it had for millions of Americans. Jerome had been just 15 years old on that December Sunday when the radio broadcasts brought news of the Japanese assault. Like many young men across the country, he had felt an immediate urge to serve, but unlike many of his white contemporaries, he faced additional barriers that had nothing to do with age or physical fitness. The Marine Corps in 1941 had been reluctant to accept black recruits, maintaining policies that effectively excluded African Americans from combat roles. It had taken executive pressure from President Roosevelt and mounting public criticism before the Corps had begun accepting black volunteers in 1942, initially restricting them to support roles and segregated training facilities. Washington had enlisted on his 17th birthday in September 1943, immediately after graduating from high school. His academic performance had been exceptional, particularly in mathematics and science, skills that would later prove crucial in his military career. But it was his performance in physical training and marksmanship that first attracted attention from his instructors at the segregated training facility at Montford Point, North Carolina. Master Sergeant Earl Johnson, a veteran Marine who had served in Nicaragua during the 1930s and had been assigned to train the first generation of black Marines, later described Washington as one of those rare recruits who seemed to understand instinctively that military training was not about breaking down the individual, but about building up capabilities that most people never knew they possessed. Washington's marksmanship scores had been remarkable from the beginning of his training. Using the standard Marine Corps rifle, the M1 Garand, he had consistently achieved expert-level scores that placed him in the top 1% of all Marine recruits during that period. More importantly, he had demonstrated an ability to maintain his accuracy under simulated combat stress that impressed even the most experienced instructors. But it was during small unit tactics training that Washington had truly distinguished himself. While many Marines excelled at following established procedures and executing predetermined battle plans, Washington had shown an unusual talent for adapting to changing circumstances and developing innovative solutions to tactical problems. During one particularly challenging training exercise, Washington's squad had been tasked with capturing a simulated enemy position that was protected by multiple machine gun emplacements and defended by instructors playing enemy forces. Previous squads had attempted frontal assaults that had resulted in simulated casualties exceeding 80%. Washington had studied the problem for several minutes, then proposed a solution that involved using abandoned farm equipment as mobile cover, while his squad approached the position from 3 different directions simultaneously. The exercise had been a complete success, with Washington's squad achieving their objective while suffering 0 simulated casualties. More importantly, the tactics he had developed had been so effective that they were subsequently incorporated into the standard training curriculum at Montford Point. Upon completion of his training, Washington had been assigned to the 3rd Marine Division and had participated in the amphibious assaults on Saipan and Tinian in the summer of 1944. These campaigns in the Pacific Theater had provided his first exposure to actual combat, experiences that had both tested and refined his tactical instincts under the most demanding possible circumstances. The assault on Saipan had been Washington's introduction to the reality of warfare. As his landing craft had approached the beach on June 15, 1944, he had watched through the grey dawn as naval gunfire and aerial bombing transformed the coastline into a landscape of smoke and destruction. The Japanese defenders had prepared their positions with meticulous attention to detail, creating interlocking fields of fire that could devastate attacking forces. Washington's unit had been assigned to capture a ridgeline that intelligence reports indicated was lightly defended. This assessment had proven to be catastrophically incorrect. As the Marines had advanced across the beach and begun climbing toward their objective, they had encountered fierce resistance from well-concealed defensive positions that had survived the preliminary bombardment. During the fighting that followed, Washington had demonstrated the tactical flexibility and quick thinking that would later serve him so well in France. When his squad leader had been wounded and the squad had become pinned down by machine gun fire from a concealed bunker, Washington had volunteered to work his way around the enemy position using a route that took advantage of bomb craters and natural rock formations. Moving alone across nearly 200 meters of terrain under enemy observation, Washington had successfully reached a position from which he could observe the Japanese bunker without being detected. Rather than attempting a direct assault, which would have been suicidal, he had used his position to direct accurate rifle fire at specific points on the bunker structure, eventually forcing the defenders to abandon their position and allowing his squad to advance. This action had earned Washington his first commendation, but more importantly, it had established his reputation as a Marine who could think independently and adapt to changing tactical situations. His squad leader, Sergeant Mike Torres, had written in his after-action report that Private Washington demonstrated exceptional tactical judgment and personal courage in successfully neutralizing an enemy position that had halted our advance. His ability to assess the tactical situation and develop an effective solution under combat conditions reflects the highest standards of Marine Corps training and leadership. The campaign on Tinian had provided Washington with additional opportunities to refine his tactical skills. The island's terrain was different from Saipan, featuring dense vegetation and numerous caves that provided excellent defensive positions for the Japanese forces. American tactics had to be adapted accordingly, emphasizing small unit operations and careful coordination between infantry and supporting arms. Washington had particularly excelled during night operations, demonstrating an almost uncanny ability to move through difficult terrain without making noise and to locate enemy positions through careful observation and analysis of small environmental clues. His fellow Marines had begun referring to him as Ghost because of his ability to appear and disappear without warning during patrol operations. One night operation in particular had showcased Washington's developing tactical expertise. His platoon had been tasked with conducting a reconnaissance patrol to determine whether a valley that appeared empty during daylight hours was being used by Japanese forces for movement during the hours of darkness. Previous patrols had failed to gather useful intelligence because enemy forces seemed to disappear whenever American units approached the area. Washington had suggested a different approach. Instead of entering the valley as previous patrols had done, his team would establish observation positions on the ridgelines overlooking the area and maintain surveillance for an entire night. This would require them to remain motionless for hours at a time, but it would also allow them to observe Japanese movement patterns without alerting enemy forces to their presence. The patrol had been a remarkable success. Over the course of 8 hours, Washington's team had documented the movement of over 40 Japanese soldiers through the valley, including what appeared to be supply operations and the positioning of equipment for a planned attack on American positions. The intelligence gathered during this single patrol had enabled American forces to prepare effective countermeasures that had disrupted the planned Japanese assault. But it was Washington's personal conduct during these Pacific campaigns that had truly distinguished him from his peers. Unlike many Marines who had responded to the stress of combat by developing aggressive or hostile attitudes, Washington had maintained a quiet professionalism that impressed both his superiors and his fellow Marines. He had consistently demonstrated concern for the welfare of his unit members, often volunteering for dangerous missions to spare others from unnecessary risk. Sergeant Torres had noted in another report that Private Washington has shown exceptional maturity and leadership potential throughout our combat operations. His concern for the welfare of his fellow Marines, combined with his tactical skills and personal courage, suggests that he would be an excellent candidate for advanced training and increased responsibility. It was these qualities that had brought Washington to the attention of the Experimental Integration Program. The Marine Corps had been under increasing pressure to demonstrate that Black Marines could serve effectively alongside White Marines in integrated units, but there had been significant resistance to such programs from both military leaders and political figures who doubted whether integration could be successful. The selection process for the European deployment had been extremely rigorous, designed not only to identify the most capable Marines, but also to ensure that the program would have the best possible chance of success. Washington had undergone extensive psychological evaluation, additional combat training, and specialized instruction in European terrain and tactical situations. Dr. Sarah Coleman, a military psychologist who had been involved in the selection process, had written in her evaluation of Washington that this Marine demonstrates exceptional emotional stability, tactical intelligence, and adaptability. His responses to stress scenarios suggest that he would be able to maintain his effectiveness even under the additional pressures associated with serving in an integrated unit, while facing potential hostility from some American personnel as well as enemy forces. The training for European deployment had been conducted at a classified facility in Scotland during the summer of 1944. Washington and the other selected Marines had spent 6 weeks learning about European terrain, German tactical doctrine, and the specific challenges associated with fighting in the temperate climate and dense population centers of Western Europe. During this training, Washington had encountered Captain Mitchell for the first time. Mitchell had been assigned as an observer to evaluate the performance of the Black Marines and to provide recommendations regarding their potential deployment in combat roles. His initial skepticism had been quickly replaced by professional respect as he observed Washington's performance during training exercises. "I have to admit that I had doubts about this program when I was first assigned to it," Mitchell had confided to a colleague during the training period. "But watching these Marines work, particularly Washington, has convinced me that we may have been overlooking some exceptional talent." Washington approaches tactical problems with a sophistication that I rarely see in Marines with much more experience. The training exercises in Scotland had been designed to replicate the conditions that the Marines would encounter in France, including coordinated operations with army units, operations in built-up areas, and the challenges of fighting against an enemy that employed different tactical doctrine than the Japanese forces they had previously encountered. Washington had consistently performed at the top of his training class, but it was during a particularly challenging exercise involving urban warfare that he had truly demonstrated his exceptional capabilities. The scenario had involved clearing a simulated German defensive position in a French village, with instructors playing enemy forces and using tactics based on actual German defensive doctrine. Previous attempts by other Marine units to complete this exercise had resulted in heavy simulated casualties and had generally required multiple attempts before achieving success. Washington's unit had approached the problem differently, spending considerable time studying the layout of the village and developing a comprehensive plan that coordinated the actions of multiple squad-sized elements. Washington had proposed using what he called progressive isolation tactics, whereby each German defensive position would be systematically isolated from mutual support before being attacked individually. This approach required precise timing and coordination, but it offered the potential for achieving success while minimizing casualties. The exercise had been executed flawlessly. Washington's unit had successfully cleared the entire village in less than 2 hours, while suffering only minimal simulated casualties. The instructors had been so impressed with the performance that they had requested Washington to brief other Marine units on the tactics his team had employed. Colonel James Patterson, the senior Marine officer overseeing the training program, had written in his final evaluation that Private First Class Washington has demonstrated tactical innovation and leadership abilities that exceed those typically seen in Marines of much greater rank and experience. His performance during training exercises suggests that he would be an asset to any combat unit, and I strongly recommend his deployment to a frontline position where his capabilities can be fully utilized. This recommendation had led directly to Washington's assignment to Captain Mitchell's company and his eventual participation in the reconnaissance patrol that would change his life forever. As he crouched in the shell crater on that cold November morning in France, watching the German positions through the morning mist, Washington carried with him not only the weight of his own expectations, but also the hopes of everyone who had worked to make his presence on this battlefield possible. The patrol had been moving for nearly 2 hours when they reached their first observation point, a destroyed farmhouse that provided excellent concealment while offering clear views of the target area. Through his binoculars, Washington could see the cluster of buildings that intelligence reports had identified as the possible location of the German observation post. The buildings appeared to be abandoned, showing the typical signs of recent combat activity, including damaged roofs, broken windows and debris scattered in the yards between structures. But Washington's trained eye detected subtle signs that suggested the area was not as empty as it appeared. Laundry hanging behind one of the buildings moved in a pattern that suggested it was being used to conceal something, and he thought he could detect the faint trace of smoke that might indicate cooking fires. Corporal O'Malley studied the target area through his own binoculars for several minutes before turning to Washington. "What do you think, Ghost?" he asked, using the nickname that had followed Washington from the Pacific Theater. "Are we looking at empty buildings or are there Germans in there?" Washington continued his careful examination of the area before responding. "There are definitely people in those buildings, Corporal," he said quietly. "Look at the laundry behind the second building from the left. It's moving too regularly to be just wind. And if you watch carefully, you can see what looks like a sentry position on the second floor of the main building. Someone is trying very hard to make this place look abandoned, but they're not quite good enough at it." Private Chen, the radio operator, had been monitoring communications traffic while the others conducted their surveillance. "I'm picking up some low-level radio activity that seems to be coming from that direction," he reported. "It's not strong enough for me to get any details, but there's definitely electronic activity out there." O'Malley made his decision. "We need to get closer for a better assessment," he said. "Washington, can you work your way to that tree line on the left and get us a view of the backsides of those buildings? Rodriguez, you and Chen stay here and provide overwatch. If things go bad, Chen needs to get on the radio immediately and call for support." Washington nodded and began preparing for his approach to the tree line. He carefully checked his equipment, ensuring that nothing would make noise or catch light as he moved. His rifle, the standard M1 Garand, was in perfect condition, but he noticed that the bayonet he had fixed to the barrel showed signs of damage from previous combat. The tip had been broken off during the fighting on Tinian, leaving only about 6 inches of the original blade. He had never bothered to replace it because bayonet fighting was relatively uncommon in the Pacific Theater, but now he wondered if he should have obtained a replacement before deploying to Europe. The approach to the tree line required Washington to cross approximately 300 meters of relatively open ground that offered minimal concealment. He would have to rely on his ability to move silently and to take advantage of the limited cover provided by shell craters, fallen logs, and slight variations in the terrain elevation. Washington began his movement just after 0700 hours, timing his advance to take advantage of a brief period when low-hanging clouds provided additional concealment from potential German observation. He moved in short rushes, covering 10 to 15 meters at a time before stopping to observe and listen for any signs that his movement had been detected. The technique he employed was one he had perfected during his service in the Pacific Theater, where Japanese forces had been extraordinarily skilled at camouflage and silent movement. Washington had learned to move by feeling the terrain with his feet before committing his full weight to each step, testing each footfall to ensure that he would not step on branches, loose stones, or other objects that might create noise. Progress was necessarily slow, But after 45 minutes of careful movement, Washington reached the tree line without incident. From his new position, he had an excellent view of the rear portions of the German-occupied buildings, and what he saw confirmed his suspicions that the area was far from abandoned. Behind the main building, he could clearly see a concealed motor vehicle, probably a German reconnaissance car, that had been camouflaged with branches and canvas covers. More importantly, he could observe what was obviously a sentry position at one of the second-story windows, where the occasional movement of a helmet was visible to his trained eye. Washington estimated that the German force probably consisted of between 8 and 12 soldiers, based on the size of the buildings and the amount of equipment he could observe. This was consistent with the typical composition of a German reconnaissance unit, which would include a mix of infantry soldiers, radio operators, and possibly officers conducting tactical reconnaissance for larger units. As he continued his observation, Washington noticed something that caused him considerable concern. The positioning of the German unit suggested that they were not simply conducting passive reconnaissance, but were preparing for some type of active operation. Equipment that appeared to include radio gear, map cases, and what might be marking materials suggested that the Germans were in the process of gathering intelligence for an attack on American positions. Washington was in the process of working his way back toward his patrol's position when he encountered the first German soldier. The German, a young soldier probably no older than Washington himself, had apparently been sent to check the perimeter around the buildings and had been moving through the tree line when the two soldiers practically walked into each other at a distance of less than 10 meters. Both soldiers froze instantly, each recognizing immediately that he was facing an enemy. The German soldier was armed with a rifle and appeared to be alert and well-trained, but he seemed momentarily confused by the encounter, perhaps not expecting to find an American patrol so close to his unit's position. Washington reacted first. Rather than attempting to use his rifle, which would have required several seconds to bring into firing position, and would have created noise that would alert the entire German unit to his presence, he drew his broken bayonet and charged directly at the German soldier. The German attempted to raise his rifle, but Washington covered the distance between them in less than 3 seconds, striking the German soldier in the chest with his shoulder and driving him to the ground. The impact knocked the rifle from the German's hands and left him momentarily stunned. Washington immediately placed the point of his broken bayonet against the German soldier's throat and spoke in the limited German he had learned during his training in Scotland. "Nicht sprechen," he said quietly. No sound. The German soldier, whose name tag identified him as Hoffman, nodded slowly to indicate that he understood. Washington could see fear in the young man's eyes, but also a kind of professional respect that suggested the German understood that he had been outmaneuvered by a skilled opponent. Washington quickly bound the German's hands using cord from his field equipment and indicated that the soldier should remain quiet and follow him. He had made a crucial decision. Rather than eliminating the German soldier, which would have been the standard tactical solution to this problem, he had chosen to take a prisoner who might provide valuable intelligence information. But as Washington began moving back toward his patrol's position with his prisoner, he encountered a much more serious problem. The German soldier's absence from his assigned patrol route had apparently been noticed by his comrades, and Washington could hear voices calling out softly in German from the direction of the buildings. Within minutes, Washington realized that he was being pursued by multiple German soldiers who were conducting a systematic search for their missing comrade. Moving through the tree line with a prisoner would be extremely difficult, and attempting to return to his patrol's position would likely lead the German search party directly to O'Malley and the others. Washington made another crucial decision. Instead of attempting to evade the German search party, he would attempt to capture additional German soldiers using the same tactics that had proven successful with Hoffman. This decision violated every established principle of small unit tactics, which emphasized avoiding contact with superior enemy forces, but Washington's assessment of the situation suggested that it might be his only option for avoiding a larger confrontation that could endanger his entire patrol. Washington selected a position near a fallen tree that provided concealment, while offering multiple routes for movement. He positioned his prisoner behind the log and used hand signals to indicate that the German soldier should remain completely silent. Hoffman nodded to indicate his understanding, and Washington was struck by the professional manner in which the German soldier was cooperating despite his circumstances. The first German searcher approached Washington's position approximately 10 minutes later. This soldier was moving more cautiously than Hoffman had been, clearly aware that enemy forces might be in the area. But his attention was focused primarily on looking for signs of his missing comrade, rather than watching for potential threats. Washington waited until the German soldier was within 5 meters of his position before emerging from concealment. Using the same direct assault tactics he had employed with Hoffman, he struck the second German soldier with his shoulder, while simultaneously grabbing the soldier's rifle to prevent him from using it. This soldier, whose name tag identified him as Muller, was slightly larger than Hoffman and attempted to resist, but Washington's superior position and the element of surprise allowed him to quickly gain control of the situation. Within seconds, Wöhler was also bound and positioned behind the fallen log with Hoffman. Washington now faced an increasingly complex tactical situation. He had 2 German prisoners, but the German search party was continuing to look for their missing personnel and was gradually working their way toward his position. He could hear at least 3 more voices calling out in German, and he estimated that the remaining German soldiers would reach his area within the next 15 to 20 minutes. Rather than attempting to evade the remaining Germans with his 2 prisoners, Washington decided to continue his aggressive tactics. His assessment was that the German soldiers were conducting their search in a predictable pattern, and that he could potentially capture them individually if he could maintain the element of surprise. The next German soldier to approach Washington's position was apparently an officer or senior enlisted man based on the way he was directing the search activities. This soldier, identified by his name tag as Sergeant Weber, was moving more systematically than the previous 2 and was clearly more experienced in tactical operations. Washington realized that he would need to modify his tactics to deal with this more capable opponent. Instead of attempting a direct assault, he decided to use misdirection. He carefully moved one of his prisoners, Muller, to a position where the German would be visible to Sergeant Weber, but where Washington himself would remain concealed. When Weber spotted Muller behind the fallen log, his first instinct was to approach to investigate why his soldier was in that position. This brought him within range of Washington's broken bayonet, and although Weber was more alert than the previous soldiers, Washington was able to overwhelm him, using the same combination of speed and surprise that had proven effective in the earlier encounters. Weber's capture required more effort than the previous 2, and the struggle generated enough noise to attract the attention of the remaining German soldiers. Washington could hear voices calling out more urgently, and he realized that the remaining Germans were aware that something was wrong. Washington now had 3 German prisoners and was facing an increasingly dangerous situation. The remaining German soldiers would be much more cautious now that they knew enemy forces were in the area, and they would likely be moving in a coordinated manner that would make individual capture much more difficult. But Washington had developed a new plan based on his assessment of German tactical doctrine. The remaining soldiers would likely attempt to establish a defensive perimeter while calling for reinforcements from their main unit. This would give Washington an opportunity to approach them during the confusion of their defensive preparations. Washington moved his 3 prisoners to a more secure position and used additional cord to ensure that they could not escape or create noise that might alert their comrades. He then began a careful approach toward the sounds of German voices, moving through the underbrush with the stealth techniques he had perfected during his Pacific service. The remaining German soldiers had indeed established a defensive position near the edge of the tree line, but their attention was focused outward, toward the direction from which they expected an American attack to come. Washington was able to approach their position from behind, using the dense vegetation to remain concealed until he was within striking distance. The next few minutes were the most challenging of Washington's military career. Working alone, he systematically approached and captured 4 more German soldiers using a combination of stealth, surprise, and hand-to-hand combat techniques. Each capture required careful planning and perfect execution, as any mistake would have alerted the remaining Germans and probably resulted in a firefight that Washington could not have won. Private Klaus Richter was captured while attempting to establish radio contact with his unit's headquarters. Washington approached him from behind while he was concentrating on his radio equipment and was able to disarm him before he could react. Corporal Franz Kruger was captured while conducting a perimeter check. Washington used the same direct assault tactics that had proven effective in the earlier encounters, but had to modify his approach because Kruger was positioned in an area that offered less concealment. Private Johann Schmidt and Private Wilhelm Fischer were captured together, while they were attempting to coordinate their defensive positions. This was the most dangerous capture, as Washington had to neutralize 2 armed soldiers simultaneously, while preventing either of them from alerting anyone else. By 0900 hours, Washington had captured 7 German soldiers, using nothing more than his broken bayonet and his tactical skills. But his situation was becoming increasingly precarious. He now had 7 prisoners to control, and he was still several hundred meters from his patrol's position. More importantly, the German unit's failure to report in would eventually attract attention from their headquarters, potentially bringing additional German forces to the area. Washington decided that he needed to move all 7 prisoners to a more secure location where he could better control them while planning his next moves. He selected a small clearing approximately 50 meters from his current position that offered good concealment, while providing enough space to manage multiple prisoners effectively. Moving 7 bound prisoners through dense vegetation without creating excessive noise or attracting attention required careful coordination. Washington established a system where the prisoners moved in single file, with each German soldier responsible for ensuring that the man in front of him did not fall or create unnecessary noise. To Washington's surprise, the German soldiers cooperated fully with these arrangements. Despite being prisoners, they maintained their military bearing and seemed to understand that cooperation was in everyone's best interest. Sergeant Weber, who appeared to be the senior German soldier present, had taken unofficial responsibility for ensuring that his men followed Washington's directions. During the movement to the new location, Washington had an opportunity to assess his prisoners more carefully. They were all young soldiers, ranging in age from probably 17 to mid-20s. Their equipment and uniforms indicated that they were part of a regular German army unit rather than elite forces, but their discipline and tactical competence suggested that they were well-trained and experienced soldiers. What struck Washington most strongly was the absence of hostility that he might have expected from enemy prisoners. While the German soldiers were obviously unhappy about their circumstances, they seemed to treat him with the professional respect that soldiers typically showed to capable opponents. There was no indication of the racial hostility that he sometimes encountered from American soldiers, and several of the Germans seemed genuinely curious about his background and training. Once Washington had established his prisoners in the new location, he faced a crucial decision about his next course of action. The tactically sound approach would be to work his way back to his patrol's position and report the situation to Corporal O'Malley, who could then call for reinforcements to help manage the prisoners and conduct a thorough search of the German-occupied buildings. But Washington's tactical assessment suggested that this approach carried significant risks. The time required to reach his patrol and organize a proper response would allow any remaining German forces to escape the area, possibly taking with them valuable intelligence about American positions. Moreover, the German unit's failure to report to their headquarters would eventually trigger a search that might lead to the discovery of Washington's patrol. Washington decided on a more aggressive course of action. He would continue his individual operations and attempt to capture the remaining German soldiers who were presumably still in the buildings. This decision was extremely risky, as it required him to leave his 7 prisoners in the clearing while operating alone against unknown opposition. But Washington had developed a plan that he believed could succeed. His observation of the German positions had shown him that the remaining soldiers were likely concentrated in the main building, probably maintaining radio watch and conducting their assigned reconnaissance mission. If he could approach the building without being detected, he might be able to capture the remaining Germans using the same tactics that had proven successful in the tree line. Washington spent several minutes briefing his prisoners on what he expected from them during his absence. Using his limited German vocabulary supplemented by hand signals, he made it clear that he expected them to remain in position and maintain silence. He also made it clear that any attempt to escape would have serious consequences, though he deliberately avoided specifying exactly what those consequences might be. Sergeant Weber nodded to indicate that he understood Washington's instructions and spoke briefly to his men in German, apparently instructing them to cooperate with the American Marines' directives. Washington was struck by the professional manner in which Weber was handling the situation, maintaining military discipline even under these unusual circumstances. Washington then began his approach toward the German-occupied buildings, leaving his broken bayonet with his prisoners as a symbol of his intention to return. He would conduct this phase of his operation using only his physical capabilities and whatever improvised weapons he might be able to acquire from the German positions. The approach to the buildings required Washington to cross approximately 100 meters of relatively open ground while remaining undetected by any German soldiers who might be maintaining surveillance. He used the same stealth techniques that had proven successful during his approach to the tree line, moving in short rushes and taking advantage of every available piece of concealment. As he got closer to the buildings, Washington could hear voices speaking German from inside the main structure. His estimate was that there were probably 3 to 5 soldiers remaining, likely including radio operators and possibly an officer. The challenge would be gaining entry to the building without alerting the Germans to his presence until it was too late for them to mount effective resistance. Washington spent nearly 30 minutes studying the building and observing the patterns of German activity before identifying what he believed would be the most effective approach. A window at the rear of the building appeared to provide access to what was probably a storage area or kitchen, and the lack of voices from that direction suggested that it was not currently occupied. Getting through the window required Washington to climb approximately 8 feet up the exterior wall of the building, using irregularities in the stone construction as hand and footholds. The climb was complicated by the need to avoid making any noise that might alert the Germans inside the building to his presence. Once inside the building, Washington found himself in what appeared to be a farmhouse kitchen that had been abandoned by its original occupants. German equipment was scattered throughout the room, including radio gear, maps, and personal belongings that confirmed his assessment of the unit's size and mission. Washington could hear German voices coming from what was probably the main room of the house, and he estimated that there were 3 or 4 soldiers present. One voice was clearly giving instructions to the others, suggesting that there was an officer or senior enlisted man directing activities. Washington's plan was to approach the Germans from behind while they were concentrated on their assigned tasks, then use surprise and intimidation to force their surrender without having to engage in prolonged combat. This approach had worked well in the tree line encounters, and he believed it offered the best chance of success in the confined space of the building interior. Moving through the house required exceptional care to avoid creaking floorboards or bumping into furniture that might create noise. Washington used techniques he had learned during his Pacific service, testing each footstep carefully and moving slowly enough to maintain complete control over his movements. As he approached the main room, Washington could hear the German conversation more clearly. One soldier was apparently giving a radio report to headquarters, describing the area reconnaissance and providing information about American positions. Another soldier seemed to be updating map positions, while a third was conducting equipment maintenance. Washington's German language skills were limited, but he was able to understand enough of the conversation to confirm that these soldiers were gathering intelligence for a planned attack on American positions scheduled for the following day. This intelligence made his mission even more critical, as preventing the completion of the German reconnaissance could disrupt enemy offensive plans. Washington positioned himself just outside the main room and prepared for what he knew would be the most challenging capture of the day. Unlike the previous encounters, which had involved individual soldiers in outdoor settings, this situation required him to simultaneously control multiple armed soldiers in a confined space, where they might be able to coordinate their resistance. Washington entered the room quickly, using the element of surprise to prevent the German soldiers from reaching their weapons. The first soldier, who was operating the radio, was captured before he could react. The second soldier, who was working with maps, attempted to reach for his rifle, but was overwhelmed before he could bring it into use. The third German soldier, who appeared to be an officer based on his uniform and equipment, offered more resistance, but was ultimately captured using the same combination of speed and tactical superiority that Washington had employed throughout the operation. These three soldiers were identified by their identification papers as Lieutenant Hans Dietrich, the unit commander, Corporal Ernst Neumann, the radio operator, and Private Otto Wagner, the unit's intelligence specialist. Their capture represented a significant intelligence coup, as their equipment included detailed maps showing planned German offensive operations and radio codes that could provide American forces with valuable tactical information. But Washington's most significant challenge still lay ahead of him. He now had 10 German prisoners scattered in 2 different locations, and he needed to consolidate them while ensuring that none of them could escape or create problems that might endanger his patrol or compromise American positions. Washington spent the next hour carefully moving his 3 newest prisoners to the clearing where he had left the original 7. This process required multiple trips, as he could only safely transport 1 prisoner at a time while maintaining adequate security. During these movements, he was constantly alert for signs that other German forces might be approaching the area in response to the unit's failure to report as scheduled. When Washington finally had all 10 German prisoners assembled in the clearing, he faced a situation that no military training manual had ever addressed. A single American Marine armed with a broken bayonet had captured an entire German reconnaissance unit without firing a shot or suffering any casualties. The German soldiers seemed as amazed by the situation as Washington himself. Lieutenant Dietrich, who spoke excellent English, engaged Washington in a brief conversation about the tactics he had employed. The German officer expressed professional admiration for Washington's tactical skills, while noting that he had never encountered such an approach in previous combat experience. "You have accomplished something quite remarkable, Marine," Dietrich said in careful English. "I have been fighting for 3 years, and I have never seen one soldier capture so many using such methods. Where did you learn these tactics?" Washington considered how to respond to this question. The truthful answer was that his tactics had been developed through a combination of formal training, combat experience in the Pacific Theater, and instinctive adaptation to the specific circumstances he had encountered. But he also realized that this conversation represented an opportunity to gather intelligence about German tactical thinking and unit organization. "Experience teaches many things, Lieutenant," Washington responded. "Perhaps we can share some professional observations during our walk back to American positions." The next challenge was getting 10 German prisoners back to American lines while maintaining security and avoiding contact with any additional enemy forces. Washington's patrol was still in their observation position approximately 2 kilometers away, but he could not simply march 10 prisoners across that distance without risking detection by other German units. Washington solved this problem by dividing his prisoners into 2 groups and moving them separately along different routes toward American positions. He sent the first group, consisting of 5 soldiers led by Sergeant Weber, along a route that followed creek beds and fence lines, providing maximum concealment from observation. He accompanied the second group, which included Lieutenant Dietrich and the other 4 soldiers, along a more direct route that would allow him to maintain better control over the potentially more dangerous prisoners. Both groups were instructed to move in single file, maintaining intervals of approximately 5 meters between individuals, and to freeze in position at any sign of enemy activity. Washington had given each group leader clear instructions about rally points and emergency procedures, and had established hand signals that would allow communication between the groups if they encountered problems. The movement back toward American positions required nearly 3 hours, as Washington maintained an extremely cautious pace to avoid detection. During this movement, he had several opportunities to observe the professional competence and discipline of his German prisoners. Despite their circumstances, they maintained military bearing and followed his instructions with a precision that reflected their training and experience. Lieutenant Dietrich used the movement time to engage Washington in discussions about tactical theory and combat experience. The German officer seemed genuinely interested in Washington's background and training, asking detailed questions about American Marine Corps training methods and tactical doctrine. "I must say that your approach to this operation was quite unlike anything we have studied regarding American tactical methods," Dietrich observed during one of their rest halts. "Our intelligence reports suggested that American Marines typically rely on overwhelming firepower and direct assault tactics. Your methods seem much more sophisticated." Washington found these conversations professionally interesting, while remaining careful not to reveal information that might compromise American operational security. But he was struck by the respectful manner in which Dietrich and the other German soldiers treated him, showing none of the racial hostility that he sometimes encountered from American personnel. During the final phase of their movement toward American positions, Washington encountered Corporal O'Malley and the rest of his patrol, who had become concerned about his prolonged absence and had begun moving in his direction. O'Malley's reaction to seeing Washington approaching with 10 German prisoners was one of complete amazement. "Ghost, what in the hell happened out there?" O'Malley asked as he surveyed the group of German prisoners. "We were expecting you back 2 hours ago with a reconnaissance report, and instead you show up with what looks like an entire German unit." Washington provided O'Malley with a brief summary of the morning's events, explaining how he had systematically captured the German reconnaissance unit using stealth tactics and his broken bayonet. O'Malley listened to this explanation with growing astonishment, occasionally asking for clarification about specific tactical details. "You captured 10 armed German soldiers by yourself, using nothing but a broken bayonet?" O'Malley repeated. "And none of them were injured, and you didn't fire a single shot?" Washington confirmed that this was indeed what had happened, and he provided O'Malley with the intelligence materials he had captured, including the German maps showing planned offensive operations and the radio equipment that could provide valuable communications intelligence. Private Chen immediately established radio contact with company headquarters to report the situation and request instructions for handling the prisoners. The response from Captain Mitchell was immediate and emphatic. "Bring the prisoners and all captured materials back to the command post, immediately for interrogation and intelligence analysis." The movement back to American lines with 10 German prisoners attracted considerable attention from other American units in the area. Word of Washington's achievement spread quickly through the battalion, and by the time the patrol reached the command post, a crowd of Marines and soldiers had gathered to observe the unprecedented sight of a single Marine escorting 10 enemy prisoners. Captain Mitchell's initial reaction was similar to O'Malley's amazement, but it quickly shifted to professional interest in the tactical implications of what Washington had accomplished. Mitchell immediately began a detailed debriefing of the operation, asking Washington to describe his tactics in precise detail and to explain his decision-making process at each stage of the encounter. "Washington, what you've accomplished here goes far beyond the normal parameters of a reconnaissance patrol," Mitchell said during the debriefing. "You've essentially conducted a one-man raid that captured an entire enemy unit and gathered intelligence that could significantly impact our operational planning. I need to understand exactly how you did this so we can determine whether these tactics can be replicated by other units." Washington spent the next 2 hours providing Mitchell with a comprehensive description of his methods, including his assessment of German tactical weaknesses and his recommendations for modifying American small unit tactics based on what he had learned during the operation. The intelligence gathered from the captured Germans proved to be extraordinarily valuable. Lieutenant Dietrich's maps revealed details of planned German offensive operations that allowed American commanders to prepare effective countermeasures. The radio equipment provided access to German communications networks that yielded additional intelligence about enemy strength and disposition. But perhaps most significantly, the manner in which Washington had conducted the operation provided American military leaders with new insights into the potential applications of stealth tactics and individual initiative in European combat conditions. The traditional American approach to warfare emphasized overwhelming firepower and coordinated unit actions, but Washington had demonstrated that individual tactical skills and innovative thinking could achieve remarkable results. Colonel Patterson, the senior Marine officer who had supervised Washington's training in Scotland, arrived at the command post the following day to personally debrief Washington about the operation. Patterson was particularly interested in understanding how Washington's Pacific combat experience had influenced his tactical approach in the European environment. "What you've accomplished here represents a significant tactical innovation," Patterson told Washington during their discussion. "The ability of a single Marine to capture an entire enemy unit without casualties suggests possibilities for small unit operations that we haven't adequately explored. I want you to work with our tactical development people to analyze this operation and develop training procedures that could teach these methods to other Marines." The German prisoners, meanwhile, were being held at a prisoner of war facility where they were undergoing detailed interrogation by intelligence specialists. Reports from these interrogations indicated that the German soldiers continued to express professional respect for Washington's tactical abilities while providing valuable information about German unit organization and operational plans. Lieutenant Dietrich, in particular, had provided intelligence officers with detailed assessments of German defensive preparations and tactical doctrine that proved extremely useful for planning future American operations. When asked about his capture by a single American Marine, Dietrich had responded that, "The Marine who captured my unit demonstrated tactical skills that would be exceptional in any army. His ability to conduct independent operations while adapting his methods to specific circumstances reflects a level of training and tactical thinking that is quite impressive." The broader implications of Washington's achievement extended far beyond the tactical success of a single reconnaissance patrol. His demonstration that Black Marines could excel in European combat conditions provided compelling evidence for the effectiveness of integrated military units and helped to accelerate changes in military personnel policies. General Omar Bradley, the senior American commander in the European theater, personally reviewed reports of Washington's operation and directed that similar integration experiments be expanded to include additional units and operational roles. Bradley's staff analysis concluded that the exceptional performance of Private First Class Washington demonstrates that individual merit rather than racial considerations should determine military assignments and opportunities. The story of Washington's achievement also attracted attention from war correspondents and military historians who recognized the operation's significance both as a tactical innovation and as a demonstration of individual courage under extraordinary circumstances. Several articles appeared in American military publications describing Washington's tactics and analyzing their potential applications in other combat situations. But for Washington himself, the most meaningful recognition came from his fellow Marines, who had observed his performance under combat conditions and had developed genuine professional respect for his capabilities. The nickname Ghost took on new significance as other Marines began requesting his participation in their patrol operations and seeking his advice on tactical problems. Sergeant Torres, Washington's squad leader from the Pacific campaigns, visited Washington's unit specifically to congratulate him on the European operation. "I always knew you had exceptional tactical instincts," Torres told Washington, "but what you accomplished in France goes beyond anything I've seen in 3 years of combat operations. You've demonstrated that individual initiative and tactical innovation can achieve results that no amount of conventional firepower could duplicate." Washington's broken bayonet, the only weapon he had used during the entire operation, became something of a legend within his unit. Captain Mitchell had the bayonet mounted and displayed in the company command post with a plaque describing Washington's achievement. The display served as a reminder to other Marines that tactical success often depended more on individual skill and innovative thinking than on superior equipment or overwhelming force. The tactical methods that Washington had employed during the operation were systematically analyzed and incorporated into Marine Corps training procedures. His techniques for stealth movement, individual combat, and prisoner control became standard elements of the curriculum at advanced infantry schools, where they were taught as examples of adaptive tactical thinking. Military psychologists also studied Washington's operation as an example of successful decision-making under stress. Dr. Coleman, who had conducted Washington's original psychological evaluation, wrote a detailed analysis of his performance that concluded, "Private First Class, Washington's ability to continuously adapt his tactics to changing circumstances while maintaining focus on his primary objective, demonstrates exceptional mental discipline and tactical intelligence. His performance under extreme stress conditions suggests psychological resilience that would be valuable in any military context. The German perspective on Washington's operation was documented through post-war interviews with the captured soldiers who had been repatriated at the end of the European conflict. Lieutenant Dietrich, interviewed by American military historians in 1947, provided a detailed assessment of Washington's tactical methods that offered insights into the operation from the enemy perspective. The American Marine who captured my unit employed tactics that were completely unexpected based on our training about American military methods, Dietrich explained during the interview. His ability to approach and neutralize trained soldiers without being detected required skills that we associated more with elite special operations units than with conventional infantry. The systematic manner in which he isolated and captured each member of my unit demonstrated tactical planning and execution abilities that were quite remarkable. Dietrich also noted that Washington's treatment of German prisoners had been entirely consistent with international conventions, despite the unusual circumstances of their capture. The Marine maintained professional military standards throughout our captivity, Dietrich observed. His conduct toward prisoners reflected the highest traditions of military service, regardless of nationality. The intelligence value of Washington's operation continued to provide benefits to American forces for weeks after the initial capture. The German radio equipment he had seized provided access to enemy communications networks that yielded valuable information about German troop movements and operational plans. The maps and documents captured from Lieutenant Dietrich's unit enabled American commanders to anticipate and counter several German offensive operations that might otherwise have achieved tactical surprise. Captain Mitchell used the intelligence windfall from Washington's operation to plan a series of successful operations against German positions in the Metz sector. The information that Washington provided through his single-handed capture of that German unit was more valuable than anything we had obtained through weeks of conventional reconnaissance, Mitchell reported to his superiors. His operation essentially provided us with a comprehensive picture of enemy capabilities and intentions that allowed us to maintain tactical superiority throughout the subsequent campaign. The broader military implications of Washington's achievement influenced American tactical doctrine for the remainder of the European campaign and beyond. His demonstration that individual initiative and unconventional tactics could achieve results that conventional methods could not duplicate led to increased emphasis on small unit operations and individual combat skills in military training programs. The integration implications of Washington's success were equally significant. His demonstration that Black Marines could excel in European combat conditions provided compelling evidence for expanding integration throughout the American military establishment. The success of Washington and other Black Marines in integrated units helped to accelerate policy changes that would ultimately transform American military personnel practices. By the end of the European campaign, Black Marines were serving in integrated units throughout the theater, and many had achieved positions of leadership and responsibility that would have been impossible under the previous segregation policies. Washington's individual achievement had contributed to a broader transformation that affected thousands of military personnel and established precedents that would influence American military policy for decades to come. Washington himself was promoted to corporal following his extraordinary achievement, and he was subsequently assigned to advanced tactical training duties, where he worked with military instructors to develop new methods for small unit operations. His insights into stealth tactics and individual combat techniques became permanent elements of Marine Corps training procedures. The recognition Washington received for his achievement included several military decorations, including the Silver Star for exceptional gallantry and tactical innovation under combat conditions. The citation for this decoration specifically noted his extraordinary individual initiative and tactical brilliance in capturing an entire enemy unit without casualties, while gathering intelligence of exceptional value to subsequent military operations. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from the lasting impact of his achievement on American military thinking and personnel policies. Washington's demonstration that individual merit transcended racial considerations helped to accelerate changes that would ultimately transform American society, as well as the military establishment. The tactical innovations that emerged from analysis of Washington's operation influenced American military doctrine throughout the remainder of World War II and continued to shape tactical thinking in subsequent conflicts. His methods for stealth movement, individual combat, and adaptive tactics became standard elements of special operations training and were later adapted for use by elite military units. The psychological impact of Washington's achievement on both American and German forces was also significant. American Marines gained confidence in their ability to overcome superior numbers through tactical innovation and individual initiative, while German forces had to revise their assessments of American tactical capabilities and individual soldier competence. The story of Washington's operation became part of Marine Corps tradition, passed down through generations of Marines as an example of what individual courage and tactical innovation could achieve under seemingly impossible circumstances. Young Marines continue to study Washington's tactics and decision-making process as examples of successful adaptive thinking under combat stress. The broken bayonet that had been Washington's only weapon during the operation was eventually donated to the Marine Corps Museum, where it remains on display as a symbol of individual courage and tactical innovation. The museum exhibit includes a detailed description of Washington's achievement and its significance in both military and social history. Lieutenant Dietrich, the German officer who had been Washington's most significant capture, maintained correspondence with Washington for several years after the war ended. In one letter, written in 1948, Dietrich reflected on the broader implications of their encounter. "Your achievement that day in France demonstrated that individual excellence recognizes no national boundaries. The tactical skills you displayed would have been exceptional in any army, and your professional conduct toward prisoners reflected the highest military traditions. Our encounter taught me that true military competence is measured by individual character and capability rather than nationality or background." The lessons learned from Washington's operation continued to influence military training and tactical development throughout the post-war period. His emphasis on individual initiative, adaptive thinking, and unconventional approaches became central elements of advanced military education programs designed to prepare leaders for complex and unpredictable combat situations. The broader social implications of Washington's achievement extended far beyond military circles. His demonstration that Black Americans could excel in the most demanding military circumstances helped to challenge prevailing assumptions about racial capabilities and contributed to the broader civil rights movement that would transform American society in the decades following the war. Military historians continue to study Washington's operation as an example of tactical innovation and individual leadership under extreme stress. His ability to achieve extraordinary results through careful planning, adaptive tactics, and personal courage provides insights that remain relevant to contemporary military thinking and leadership development. The farmhouse where Washington conducted the climactic phase of his operation was preserved as a historical site by the French government, which recognized the significance of the events that had taken place there. A memorial plaque installed at the site honors both Washington's achievement and the professional conduct of the German soldiers who became his prisoners. Washington's post-war career continued to reflect the exceptional qualities that had distinguished his wartime service. He pursued higher education using benefits provided by the GI Bill, ultimately earning advanced degrees in engineering and mathematics. His academic achievements paralleled his military success, demonstrating the intellectual capabilities that had underlain his tactical innovations. In later life, Washington became involved in programs designed to provide educational and professional opportunities for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. He frequently spoke about his military experiences, emphasizing the importance of preparation, adaptability, and perseverance in overcoming seemingly impossible challenges. The tactical manual that was eventually developed, based on analysis of Washington's operation, became a standard reference work for special operations training programs throughout the American military establishment. The manual's emphasis on individual initiative, stealth tactics, and adaptive problem-solving reflected the innovative approaches that Washington had developed through his combination of training, experience, and instinctive tactical thinking. The integration of American military forces, which Washington's achievement had helped to accelerate, became a model for social change that influenced civilian institutions throughout American society. The demonstration that integrated units could achieve superior performance when individuals were evaluated based on merit rather than racial considerations provided compelling evidence for broader social integration. The German reconnaissance unit that Washington had captured was typical of the well-trained and experienced forces that American troops faced throughout the European campaign. Their professional competence and tactical skills made Washington's achievement even more remarkable, as he had succeeded in neutralizing highly capable opponents through superior individual tactics and innovative thinking. The intelligence windfall from Washington's operation contributed to American tactical superiority throughout the final months of the European campaign. The detailed information about German defensive plans and tactical doctrine that had been captured with Lieutenant Dietrich's unit enabled American commanders to anticipate enemy actions and develop effective countermeasures. The weapons and equipment captured during Washington's operation were thoroughly analyzed by American technical intelligence specialists, who used the information to better understand German military capabilities and tactical methods. This analysis contributed to the development of improved American equipment and tactics that enhanced combat effectiveness throughout the remainder of the war. The radio communications equipment that Washington had captured provided American intelligence specialists with access to German communications networks for several weeks following the operation. This communications intelligence yielded valuable information about German troop movements, supply situations, and operational planning that contributed to American tactical advantages in subsequent operations. The psychological impact of Washington's achievement on German forces in the Metz sector was documented through prisoner interrogations and captured documents. German commanders expressed concern about American tactical capabilities and individual soldier competence, leading to changes in German defensive planning and patrol procedures. The training implications of Washington's operation extended throughout the American military establishment, influencing not only Marine Corps training, but also Army and other service programs designed to develop individual combat skills and tactical innovation. The emphasis on adaptive thinking and unconventional approaches became standard elements of advanced military education. The historical significance of Washington's operation was recognized through its inclusion in official military histories and tactical studies that documented American performance during the European campaign. These historical accounts emphasized both the tactical innovation and the broader social implications of Washington's extraordinary individual achievement. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.